I'm Tracy Guy Decker, and you're listening to Deep Thoughts About Stupid Shit, because pop culture is still culture, and shouldn't you know what's in your head? Today, I'll be sharing my deep thoughts about the 90s pop sensation, the Spice Girls, including their movie Spice World, with my sister, Emily Guy Birkin, and with you. Let's dive in. Have you ever had something you love dismissed because it's just pop culture? What others might deem stupid shit, you know matters. You know it's worth talking and thinking about. And so do we. So come overthink with us as we delve into our deep thoughts about stupid shit. All right, Em. The Spice Girl. Tell me what you know or remember about the Spice Girls.
So I remember, I loved the song Wannabe, even though I never knew what zig-a-zig-AH meant. I remember the movie, bits of it. I remember bits of the movie. I remember Meatloaf having a cameo and saying, I'd do anything for those girls, but I won't do that.
Yeah, it was about unclogging toilets. That's what he wouldn't do for them.
And for those listeners who are not old enough to remember, Meatloaf had a huge hit. It was I'd do anything for love, but I won't do that.
Yeah.
I remember I really liked Emma, who was, I think, Baby Spice.
Yes.
I liked her style the best of the five, because they each had their own style of dress. And I was very much into the baby doll dresses and I didn't do pigtails exactly, but the kind of clips and stuff that she would wear in her hair. And so for me, I was baby doll dresses and Doc Marten boots. And so I don't remember if she wore.
Well, we were all wearing really big shoes in the 90s.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Yes, she was wearing, they weren't Doc Martens, but she was wearing big shoes.
Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, if left alone with all the clothes in the world, that's what I'd wear. I can recall in the 90s, I would see friends of our grandmother who were doing had plucked all their eyebrows and drew them back in.
Yeah.
And being I don't understand, why are they still doing this weird makeup thing from 40 years ago? And I now understand because I still love the way where you outline your lip with the darker
lip liner.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. So I get it now. You learn a makeup technique, you like it, and you keep it for life.
Yeah.
So those are I remember the style quite a bit. I remember how big they were. I remember there was because there's always some sort of pushback in every direction. There was is this the death of feminism? I remember are these girls showing the wrong thing because they're sexual? Are they everyone had an opinion. And the one other thing is I know what the post Spice Girls life is for two. So there's Posh, that's Mel B.
Posh is Victoria.
Victoria, that's right.
She's married to
David Beckham. And they have unutterably gorgeous children. Because how could they not?
Yeah, 4 of them.
Oh my goodness. They're such gorgeous people.
Yeah.
And then I know, is it Mel C?
Sporty is Mel C.
Mel C. Okay, so Mel B was Scary Spice.
Yes.
And I know that she had a relationship with Eddie Murphy. And then I've kind of lost track of Jerry, who was Ginger Spice, and Emma, who was Baby Spice, and Sporty, who was Mel
C.
C. Yes. But I look back on them fondly and kind of wonder if they have any lasting impact, considering how huge they were at the time. But if I said something to my kids about it, they would have no idea who I was talking about.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's about what I remember about the Spice Girls. So tell me, why are we talking Spice Girls today?
Yeah. So Wannabe was released in summer of 96. And then the album Spice was released in November of 96. I went to London on a semester abroad thing in January 97.
Mm-hmm.
So I was living in London I turned 21 while I was there.
I came to visit you.
Yeah.
For your 21st birthday.
So I was living in London for almost 6 months, the first 6 months of 1997. And like, you could not avoid the Spice Girls in the UK. I mean, I don't think in the world, but especially in the UK in 97. Like, you just couldn't. They were everywhere. And my, leftist, feminist 21-year-old self had some major questions about these women who were not that much older than I was. I mean, they were about my age. And it was like, if I was going to fight them, I was going to lose and my head was going to explode. So I decided to just embrace them. And I embraced them wholeheartedly. I just was like, all right, let's do this, And I just really got into the Spice Girls mania at the time. And so as we're doing this project and sort of looking back at things that shaped us, I decided that, it's been 30 years. Like, it's let's look back at the Spice Girls and see, with a little bit of hindsight, which of my impulses was right. The one that was like, oh no, or the one was like, hey, this is so much fun. And I think, spoiler alert, both were right. It's a both and. But I want to get into it a little bit. So I want to talk about the ways in which the phenomenon of the Spice Girls, both the concept and then actually the execution, sort of gave with one hand and took with the other in terms of true movement toward female empowerment, toward women taking control of their own destinies, toward representation, all of those things. That's really the heart of what I want to talk about. And I'll talk a little bit more about why I think some of those, the give and take. And I do want to talk a bit about Spice World, the movie, because it was just so much fun. So for those of you who don't remember, the Spice Girls were a manufactured pop group who hit the scene hard in 96. They dropped and they were an instant overnight success. Well, that's what we saw. There actually was quite a bit of work that went into becoming that overnight success. This manufactured pop group, it was like the brainchild of this father-son duo who, the boy band was extremely popular in Britain in the mid-90s. And this young guy, he's like 22 at the time. And he's like, we should do this with women. And he convinced his dad, who was like a entertainment industry accountant, I guess, looking for a new project. So he convinced his dad to do this, and they found a funder to help them do this. They held auditions. They auditioned somewhere around 2,000 women to try and fill these 5 slots. So they got these 5 girls, and originally actually Emma Bunting, who became Baby, she was not a part of the original cast 5. There was another woman, Michelle, who dropped out. It was a little more rigorous, more demanding time-wise and everything-wise than she had anticipated, and her mom got sick. So she dropped out, and they replaced her with Emma Bunting, who became Baby. So these 5 women, the idea was to create a girl group, like the boy bands of the early 90s.
And
there were some British ones that were the specific model, so that I think they didn't make the jump.
They didn't cross the pond.
But like Backstreet Boys, NSYNC kind of a vibe, but with all girls. And the mistake that the father-son duo made, their financial backer said, I don't want to give these girls contracts because I want to keep them on their toes, because they know that I can fire them at any time. Well, they put all this money into like dance training and vocal training and choreography and all this work. And then they didn't have contracts. And the girls were like, we're the talent. See you later. and like got themselves a new manager. So
wow. Good for them.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Right. And the way they did it, the original managers wanted to like do it really slow and like come to the record labels with a fully formed album already. And Ginger Spice, actually, like, she was very driven, and she was like, no, we should do like a showcase. We should like invite the record execs to come see us perform because we're the real deal. So they did that, and they had record execs like fighting over them. And that's when they were like, oh, we don't need you anymore. So
Jerry Halliwell was like the oldest by like she was
22 when the others were like 19.
Oh, okay. Wow. I was thinking she was like 25 when the others were like 19. Okay.
No, she was 22 when the others were like 19. And she was very driven. So in fact, she was not cast in, like, she wasn't on the short list. They had the 2000, they narrowed it down to like a dozen. And she wasn't one of the dozen, but she was gonna be in this group. And so she showed up to the dozen, like the continuing auditions of the smaller group. And she just had so much energy and drive and ambition that she did end up making the cut. So they got this new manager who was Annie Lennox's manager. He's the one who got them the Pepsi spot. And I think he also got them the movie. And then they weren't happy with him either. So they dropped him, and Jerry did the work for a while. Although part of the reason they dropped him was because he was so demanding. He wasn't letting them rest at all. Jerry had some struggles with mental health and with eating disorder. More than one of the girls had eating disorders.
It was the 90s.
Yeah. And Jerry had actually like checked herself into an inpatient place because she was really struggling, and they put her on Zoloft, and like she was having trouble again. And the manager, I think his name was Simon Fuller, he like wouldn't give her time off, and when she's like, I'm unwell. So that's when they left. So that's when they left him. She was doing the managing. It was grueling. And their whole arc, this meteoric arc, they were top of the charts with multiple songs. It all fizzled within like 2 years.
That quickly?
Really quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Jerry left the band after only about 2 years. The other four continued to tour. So their shtick was that they were archetypes. Right. The 5 of them were 5 archetypes. And initially
okay. Yeah. I think you're about to tell us. I was going to be like, was that something that was part of the audition process and all of that? Or?
No, that actually was the girls. So in fact, the girls and their later manager, the father-son duo who started it, wanted them all to dress alike, because that was kind of the boy band model.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's what they had been thinking. And it wasn't quite working for them. So the new manager claimed, I don't know if this is corroborated, but I read it in a story which from either the New York Times or the Guardian, which I will link to in the show notes, that actually Annie Lennox told Fuller, like, whatever they are, like, have them lean into that and do over the top, whatever the sort of kernel of their personality is, like play it up so they become a persona and a caricature of that. So they were these 5 archetypes, which then got named by a journalist at Top of the Pops. So their Spice names came from a journalist. It did not come from them originally, but they completely embraced it and made it a part of who they were. So their 5 names, there was Mel C, who was actually cast first. She was the one Black Spice Girl who was Scary Spice, which, y'all, we will come back to that.
Yeah.
So Scary Spice, Emma Bunting, who was the youngest, who was the one that you identified with in terms of fashion, was Baby Spice. So she wore these baby doll dresses. She was always sucking on a lollipop. She wore her hair in pigtails. Y'all, we're going to come back to that as well. Then there was Posh Spice. That was Victoria. She's now Beckham. So, and she came from a fairly wealthy family and sort of lived into that kind of
stereotype,
upper crust affluence stereotype. There was Jerry Halliwell, who was kind of, sort of, not exactly the leader. She was the one who was the oldest. She actually, the journalist wanted to name her Sexy Spice, or so I understand. I was looking for kind of documentation of that. I remember that from the 90s. So
yeah,
I don't,
me too.
I'm having a hard time finding where she said that. But I remember that from the 90s that Sexy Spice was floated, and she was like, come on, everybody's sexy. And so she went with Ginger, since she was wearing her hair very red then. I think it is naturally reddish, but she was wearing it like artificially red. So she was Ginger Spice. And then there was Mel C, who was Sporty Spice, who would wear sort of track pants and running shoes and tank tops, and had very buff arms.
And she always had her hair up in a very tight ponytail, didn't she?
Yes.
Yeah.
Usually, yes. So these were the 5 women, and they embraced these archetypes, which all except for Sporty were still very sexualized in terms of what they wore, which is not to say that Mel C isn't sexy. It's just that her clothing was slightly less sexualized. I mean, it was still sexualized, because even like she would wear the tanks, or she would wear like a mesh shirt with just a sport bra underneath, or just a, or just a bandeau sometimes. Like, so it wasn't that she wasn't sexualized. It was just slightly less so. There was slightly less skin showing often, because like Jerry would wear these, I mean, like a bathing suit almost.
Yeah, it was like bustiers, I remember. And
with just a bodysuit, and then tall boots. And anyway, they had this huge arc of fame with a #1 album, like right out the gate. And then they had this movie that they were such a buzz that this movie, Spice World, actually like it's a who's who of movie and music folks who agreed to be in it. So we had, as you remember, Meatloaf was in it. Meatloaf had more than just a cameo. Like, he was a minor character.
Oh, okay.
He's in multiple scenes. So Meatloaf was in it. Elton John is in the first few minutes. That is just a cameo, but he's in the very first few minutes. At one point, they make a joke about Elvis Costello, where they talk about how fame can be so fickle, and then he's the bartender and asks them what they want. So Elvis Costello is in it.
It's like a Muppets movie, it sounds like.
It is like a Muppets movie, with Roger Moore as this bizarre sort of like, not bad guy exactly, but not a good guy either. He's the chief. He's like the record exec or something, who is actually calling the shots about what the girls do, not to them. He has an intermediary who's Richard E. Grant, who also was a great actor, who's their manager, Clifford. So, but Roger Moore, it's over the top. It's so campy. So in the very first scene, he's petting a cat, like a Bond villain. But then later in the movie, he pets a long-eared rabbit and then a piglet that he feeds with a bottle. It's just so weird.
And just for listeners who don't know, Roger Moore had played James Bond in the like 70s. Right.
So also Richard O'Brien, who we talked about, who is the brilliant mind behind Rocky Horror Picture Show, is in it as a bad guy. He's a bad guy paparazzo photographer who works for a bad guy, like tabloid owner, who kind of reads to me like a Rupert Murdoch kind of a figure, who's like intentionally trying to bring them down.
I remember there's a point where I think it's like Jerry, someone asks them like, oh, do you want to do this? And Jerry's like, oh, is the Pope Catholic? And then they have the headline is like, they question the Catholicism of the Pope or something like that.
Yeah. It's actually even, yes, that is the joke. And the thing she's responding to is like something like, do you like boys? Or it's something vaguely sexual.
Oh, okay.
That she is saying is the Pope Catholic. And then the next scene is the Spice Girls question the religiosity of the Pope. And then they like cut to a interview with someone who's like a bishop saying like, I'd like to know what evidence they have for that. I'd really like to know. Stephen Fry is in it. There's there's this like dreamscape where they're imagining being on trial for making bad music, like this out of style. And Stephen Fry is the judge. He calls them the wrong names. Like there are 2 girls named Mel, and he calls them Melvin. And then after he passes judgment on them, he says, Now call Houghty and the Blowfish. So it's like full of these stupid topical jokes.
Yeah.
George Wendt is trying to pitch a movie to them. So it's this it becomes this very circular where the movie that they're pitching is the movie that we're watching. So there's this scene where Victoria is driving the bus to try and get them to their Albert Hall live gig. And it's a big London double-decker bus that's painted with the Union Jack and has spice on the roof. And the writer is saying, you know, they're rushing to get there and they're approaching London Bridge and, oh no, it's raising to let a boat through. And are they crazy enough to try and make the jump? It's insane. And George Wendt goes, it's expensive. And then it cuts to a very clearly a model of London Bridge and this little model bus with like visible wires. And it makes the jump. And then you cut back to George Wendt going, or not.
And George Wendt was Norm from
Norm and
Cheers, right? Okay,
yeah. So there's really very little plot to this movie. It was based on sort of Hard Day's Night. It's really like an extended music video. It has the barest of a plot in order to kind of string it all together. It's just silly and it's delightful. It's so much fun. There's like a flashback with the guy who owns the pub or the diner where they used to hang out. And it's the dad from Fleabag. That actor is the friend, Brian. And really the like lesson of the movie is that friendship is more important than anything. Right? It's more important than money. It's more important than a live gig. They have a sixth friend who is pregnant. And on her own, the baby daddy has left her and she goes into labor like the night before their big gig at Royal Albert Hall, and they prioritize their friend and they get to perform. They get their cake and eat it too. So that's kind of the background of this group and the movie that they made. And sort of how it hit in my life. Like I'm about the same age as these women. And, you know, I was a junior. I was a junior in college at Oberlin College, which for those of you who don't know is like a bastion of liberalism. And, you know, mom reminded me that at that time in my life, I don't remember what I was reading about, but I was reading about something about the way that like Western medicine controls women's bodies. And I went to mom and I was like, don't you dare take hormone replacement therapy for menopause. And mom was like, it's not time yet. And also like, excuse me? So I'm just trying to give listeners like the context of who I was in that moment, which by the way, listeners, I was wrong. I was wrong. I am going to seek out hormone replacement therapy, just FYI. Sorry, Em.
I was similarly radicalized when I was reading like Ina May Garten when I was pregnant. And so I was reading like midwives and stuff like that. I was just like, oh, Western medicine, policing women's bodies, medicalizing natural processes. And then at the same time, it was just like, yeah, I'm not having a baby at home. Anyway, so continue.
So that was the context of sort of where they got inserted into my brain and sort of what was happening. And so looking back at them now in 2024, there's some things that stand out to me. Let's come back to the nicknames that this journalist gave them, but which they embraced and we all embraced. And Scary and Baby. And like, maybe I'm just Old Spice, but
you had that locked and loaded, didn't you?
We actually made that joke in the 90s. We all tried to give each other spice names. And that was the name. There was a professor that I totally had a crush on, but I would hang out with occasionally. I think he knew I had a crush on him and just, I mean, I think he just enjoyed the attention. Anyway, I called him Old Spice. But okay, so yeah, so maybe I'm just Old Spice, but like, why did we think that was okay to call the one Black Spice girl Scary Spice?
So here's the thing, and I'm like just thinking about this, so hadn't thought about it in 25 years, but I remember it being like okay that she was Scary Spice because it was about how she had her hair in like she did her hair very differently in like Bantu knots and things like that. So I was like, oh no, it was about her hair. And then I'm like, how is that not about her being black?
Right.
Like that I had that thought that was like what made it okay back in the 90s. And I was just like, oh, it was about her hair just now. And then I'm like, holy, no, that's grim. That's gross. That's awful. How is that like?
And I mean, the way she talked about it in preparation for today, they did an Hollywood story about the Spice Girls. And she talked about in this interview about how, you know, she's kind of in your face and she'll make these big, like, like tongue out, like big facial expressions. And she always was wearing animal print. Like she loves animal print. And so that's the way she was sort of talking about it at the time. That it was about personality, but like, I don't know. I hope that we wouldn't do that today. I guess. Is
well, I'm just like, I'm thinking, so you and me, if we had been a Spice Girl, not that we would have, but if we'd been a Spice Girl wearing animal prints and
it wouldn't
big
have been
personalities, we wouldn't have been Scary Spice. We might have been Bagel Spice. Because that is what you associate with a Jewish woman who wears animal prints and has strong opinions.
Yeah.
So like that's
yeah. And then Baby Spice, she was the youngest, and she also like this was part of the Annie Lennox, Simon Fuller advice about like taking like the thing that is true and then making it more so. So if you like pink and fluffy and your mom's your best friend, you're pink and fluffy 24/7 and you always have a lollipop in your hand and you just like play it up. And so she did. And also like, how did we not see that was kind of like pedophilia? Like,
well, this was the same time when like this was about when Britney Spears debuted.
Right.
And I remember being horrified at the time at how, like, because she was under 18 when she debuted, and her first song, which is escaping me, but she wore that like Catholic schoolgirl uniform with pigtails, and there were like photo spreads of her like with her stuffed animals, and it was a big deal about how like she's saving her virginity for marriage. And so like I remember at the time being like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. So I feel like that question remains. And my overarching point, I think, of the Spice Girls is that we're giving and taking at the same time. And so all of those things, like about Baby, about Scary, like the racialized sexuality of Mel C, or excuse me, Mel B, a Scary Spice. And also, especially compared to even like Christina Aguilera, who's about the same era, at least in Spice World, these girls were remarkably asexual, right? They were very sexy. But like there's one scene where they fly to Italy to film this, you know, to do this. I don't know if it was supposed to be live or filmed or whatever, but they're doing their song. And then these like nearly nude male dancers kind of come out to dance behind them. And they're wearing like captains, like sea captains hats and white, tight, small biker shorts. And that's it that these dudes are wearing. And the girls are like, what the hell is this? And they stop singing and they're like, no. And their manager, Clifford, Richard E. Grant, goes to like argue with the Italian guy whose dancers these are. And like the two dudes are like arguing, like almost coming to fisticuffs. Meanwhile, we sort of cut and the girls are kind of talking to some of these male dancers, and like Baby's like, well, you see, I've got this dolly and this, and she's like naming all the stuffed animals that are in her bed. And she's like, so there's just no room for you, mate. And like,
I remember that joke now that you say that. Yes.
And then like one of the others was like, I don't know, like look at his muscles. It looks like there's like ferrets under there or something. He's like popping his pecs. So like these hyper masculine, nearly nude male models, male dancers who in a Christina Aguilera video of the same time, there would have been some grinding going on. In the Spice Girls movie, it was like, ew, no, thank you. Put some damn clothes on. Right. And the final like compromise, actually, because we do see them compromise. They're dancing in these like, they kind of are like pinkish, purplish suits, like men's suits, but they're not because they're made out of spandex. But then the dancers turn around and they're assless. So, you know, they're like, tongue is firmly in cheek at all times. And there's this like, they actually don't go down the fully hypersexualized route that one would expect based on the way that their costumers kitted them.
So something that strikes me is, because what I recall from this, I remember having a sense that Jerry was not necessarily the leader of the Spice Girls. I didn't think of her like that way, but I thought of her as like a businesswoman. And I definitely thought of these women as having much more agency within their careers than I did with people like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. So what's interesting is like thinking about that, because they did definitely dress in a sexualized way, but it really felt like, and maybe it was because they leaned into these like archetypes that they each had, but it felt like it was more their choice than it was for Spears. Not to say like, I don't want to, like, I actually have a great deal of respect for Britney Spears, which is something that, you know, 20 years ago would be hard for me to imagine saying that, just because of the conversation, the national conversation we had about her and the way that she was commoditized by everyone. But with the Spice Girls, the impression that I got was like, yeah, I'm wearing a sexy version of what I actually like to wear. Whereas with other pop stars who were sexualized, female pop stars who were sexualized, it felt like, okay, I'm going to wear what the people who are making the decisions tell me to wear.
Yeah, I don't have a choice. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and for the ones like, you know, the Spice Girls were like young, but they're all at least over 18.
I'm not sure if Emma was when they started, but she if she wasn't, she quickly was. Like she was,
and
at youngest she was 17.
Yeah. This was since there are auditions, it feels like more choice involved than for Britney Spears, and seems like a Michael Jackson type figure.
For sure, especially since her family
father.
was her managers. I think it's really interesting. So I think your assessment of them, of Jerry as a businesswoman, I think that's actually accurate. And even the sort of not exactly leader, because my understanding is that the original father-son duo who did the auditions, who created this band, were envisioning a classical lead singer and backup kind of a band. And the women themselves were like handing out the different solo lines so that no one actually was a clear leader, right? Like, I think Jerry often was sort of the loudest, and I think she was leading as the businesswoman. So in that sense, she was leader. But in terms of musically, it was not, you know, it was not sort of the lead singer with backup singers. That was not the relationship musically.
Yeah, it wasn't Gladys Knight and the Pips. It was,
So that's an interesting thing, you know, that your perception, I think there are things to corroborate. There are reasons that you thought that.
Well, the getting into it also, just the fact that the movie was all about friendship and the importance of friendship. And even though this is a manufactured band, it did feel like they were a cohesive group.
Well, so here's an interesting thing. Like, part of the way that the original team manufactured them was that once they were cast, he sent the 5 of them to live together in a 3-bedroom home.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So the relationships didn't happen organically, but that doesn't mean they weren't real.
Yeah.
And I think they took a lot of flack at the time and even since. I think all bands, even ones that weren't, like the Beatles got guff for not being authentically. Whatever. We don't need to talk about the Beatles. But, the Monkees, like, can you remember the conversations in our house about how they weren't a real group because they had been cast about the Monkees? So, that's the way that the music business talked about them, like the serious critics, And in fact, they knew it, and they were like, there's it fairly early in the movie. There's this self-deprecating line. They finish a rehearsal, and the guy who's like, I don't know, their choreographer or whatever, he says like, that was perfect, girls, without actually being any good. And I feel like that line kind of epitomizes the Spice Girls. And also it's not fair, right?
What's interesting is like, it's this catch-22, this no-win situation, because like we have this sense of like real music has to come about organically, but there are so many fewer opportunities, especially for marginalized creators, to create real organic music in just based on so many different things. So there's that aspect of it. But then having something that is created and specifically tailored to like, okay, we want to make hit songs. We want to make pop songs. We want to do this, which is a perfectly valid way of making art. And I'm thinking about when you were talking about how Michael Jackson with Off the Wall had won a Grammy, and he's like, that's not enough. And so he specifically went out to win all the Grammys.
Yeah.
And like the idea that that is your end goal is considered somehow illegitimate, and doubly so if it's women.
Yeah.
Because how dare they be in any way ambitious? Yeah. And then when they actually do create something, and like their message, like that, this is the other aspect that I was thinking about in just the difference between the Spice Girls and other female pop stars at the time, is that they knew that they appealed to girls. And with the like the Italian dancers and all of that and the tongue-in-cheek stuff, they are in some ways giving with one and taking away with the other, but they are trying to create a message that like it really is about friendship and like the comfort of like your stuffies. You don't need to make room for a mate. It doesn't matter how many abs he has. And so like they're very intentionally crafting this message of like, it's about the 5 of us and our friend who we want to help, who's having a baby by herself. And it's about this solidarity among the 5 of us who, it's like, we have to deal with all of these hoops that we have to jump through, where people are going to take everything we say out of context, as opposed to, other manufactured female pop stars is about like, it's the male gaze. Yeah. Like, this is, we know that little girls are going to emulate this, but who cares? It's about the male gaze. And actually, all the better, so that we have more young girls who are dressed like this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that then, like, part of the reason we as a culture and sort of serious music critics felt justified in completely panning this group was because they did appeal to young girls. Mm-hmm. Young girls went crazy for them. And that's actually something else I want to talk about now that we are 25, 30 years later. Some of the young girls that they influenced, like friggin' Adele was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like Adele says, unironically, I was a huge Spice Girls fan. So now we have this talent that even serious music critics can't help but appreciate, who says, they made me sing into my hairbrush. They made me want to do this, right? And so I think that's also like an interesting like twist. And it's not even a twist. It's an additional layer to the short-sightedness of the so-called serious music critics who completely dismissed this air quotes manufactured, this air quotes inauthentic, this perfect but not very good group who was wildly popular.
Yeah. I've talked before about how the erasure of marginalized artists influences. And I think this is part of it as well. In that, let's say 50 years from now, 100 years from now, Adele is like a serious artist. I mean, she's won Grammys. She's amazing. She is amazing. And I imagine that biographers in 50 or 100 years will just skip over like, oh, that's embarrassing that she says that about the Spice Girls because they weren't serious. And so, and that happens over and over again, where if there is something that people were influenced by that was popular, but it was like generally appealed to young women, then we're just going to dismiss it. We're just not going to mention it. And so like, and good on Adele for like, no, I loved them. They made me want to sing. I'll include a link in the show notes, but I read a book called, and it was actually, I read it because Neil Gaiman said it blew his mind. It was a book called How to Suppress Women's Writing by Joanna Russ, which she originally wrote in the early 80s. Joanna Russ was she might still be alive, come to think of it, a science fiction writer. And so she was talking about the lack of women in science fiction writing. Now, the early 80s version of it was not intersectional. And I read an updated version where she was much better able to see the intersection of various marginalizations because she's a white woman. She was very focused on white women. But it blew my mind because it helped me understand why I so often feel like I can't have influences if I want to be a serious writer. I can't love Barbara Michaels, who I like literally every week I would go to the library and get three more of her books because she wrote like 70 and like I worked through them all because I loved them, but they were women's fiction. So like, and romance adjacent. So I couldn't admit to anyone that I really liked them.
Yeah.
I think that that's really fascinating. And part of like, there are so many axes on which the Spice Girls can be dismissed. Like they're women. It was an audition process and not organic. They sang pop music, and like pop music isn't real music. And
they didn't write their music.
They didn't write their own music.
They didn't play any instruments.
Yeah, but like "Wannabe" is a banger. I mean, my God, if that song comes on at the gym, you speed up. That's a damn good song.
It's interesting too, because I think also the message of like that song, then they lived it too. Like if you want my future, forget my past, right? Is one of the lyrics. Like, so like you don't know who I am, right? And I'm going to be who I am. And
if you want to be my lover, you got to get with my friends.
Yep. And so in the height of their popularity, one of the tabloids in Britain got a hold of some nudie photos that Jerry did when she was younger and published them. So, Spice Girls get spicy. You can imagine the sort of horrible headlines. And the other girls just rallied around her and were like, yeah, I mean, she did it. Okay.
We all have tits.
Yeah, like let's. Can we talk about our album now? And so it was sort of this sort of refusal to cancel, refusal to apologize for who they were, and like even the way that they said it in their own words like Mel C, Sporty Spice, would say like the Spice Girls are about just, the freedom to be who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Just be who you actually are, which is not a message that any of us get very often, but especially, certain intersectional identities don't get that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is really interesting. In addition to the huge popularity among women and girls, Spice Girls are wildly popular in the LGBTQ community, especially among gay men. Their different archetypes and characters have become drag personas of different drag performers. Several of the Spice Girls have been guest judges on RuPaul's Drag Race. And that has become a thing that like they've become truly beloved and kind of iconic for members of that marginalized community, which I think is also like really, really interesting. And that knee-jerk like, oh no, that 20-year-old Tracie had when they first came out to these like hypersexualized archetypes. That 20-year-old Tracie didn't see that even a little. Like maybe at 20 and 21, I looked at Mel C Sporty and was like, I wonder if she's gay. That was the extent of how I thought about the Spice Girls' effect on or meaning to folks who might be marginalized because of their sexual orientation, because of their sexuality. And I don't think that should be downplayed. Like, I'm glad I see that now. I'm glad that, that message was so front and center in this wildly popular pop group,
Yeah.
And it became what one writer called a gateway drug for feminism, a gateway drug for coming out of the closet, maybe, like a gateway drug for like leaning in a little more to the thing that you really like, but that might make you a little bit of a weirdo.
It's interesting that I'm thinking about, so like part of what I'm reacting to with the Spice Girls and putting them in comparison with other female pop singers of the time is it's not that they had total control or agency of their look or any of that, but there is this sense of like, especially with like Jerry's nude photos being published and as an attempt to shame them, is like, I am unapologetically a sexual being. So why are you trying to shame me for that? And I got a sense of that in terms of the way that they each presented themselves as an archetype. And, obviously, yeah, they leaned into it, but there is this sense of like, be who you are and be unapologetic about it. And, there in the 90s, we got a lot of like women taking control of their sexuality as like feminism, and yes and no, because as with so many things in feminism, like we were talking about Jamie Lee Curtis's character in Trading Places, where she is a savvy businesswoman. She's not shamed for being a prostitute. She has taken control of her sexuality and her finances and her life, but she's still in this machine of late stage capitalism.
Right.
And so, it's not exactly a triumph.
Right.
And so there's a similar sort of feeling with the Spice Girls. But thinking about what this means for people in marginalized sexuality groups, when it is a mainstream group that is showing something like that. And I just before we got on, I will put YouTube on in the background while I'm doing something that doesn't require my full attention. And so there was a Ms. Mojo video that I'll share in the show notes that was talking about, I think it was like 20 celebrities who were like shut down homophobic questions or were true allies to LGBT community. And one of them was talking about Judy Garland and how in I think the 70s, it might have been the early 80s, she was asked about her gay fans in a way where like, they're like, it was extremely offensive, and she shut that shit right down. And the voiceover from Miss Mojo was saying like, she recognized that this was a major part of her fandom, and that she gave, specifically with Wizard of Oz and Somewhere Over the Rainbow, this idea is there's a place where you can be yourself. And whether or not that was something she was aware of at the time of making Wizard of Oz, she knew by then that this was part of her fandom and that she would not tolerate anyone being nasty to the people who loved her stuff and found meaning in it.
Right.
And so I'm thinking about that as well. Like, you know, I doubt that going into this, just as you didn't see it as a 20-year-old, that there was, you know, this possibility for like the LGBT community to embrace them.
They've said it surprised them.
Yeah.
And that they're grateful for it.
Yes. But the response to that, to like, this means something to me, it made me feel like more myself. It made me feel like I could be who I am and be loved. And for the Spice Girls to be like, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, I will be a judge on RuPaul's Drag Race. I can't wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something just lovely about that. And that's part of where, like, because you and I were raised with this idea of there's a right way to create art.
Yeah.
You know, like, that's not real music, you know,
right.
Like, best of albums aren't real music.
They're not real albums.
They're not real albums. Because we grew up with that very rigid thinking, I think it's wonderful to look back on something like Spice Girls and recognize how much good can come out of something that is not, quote unquote, real art. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how it was made. It doesn't matter what the impetus was. It doesn't matter if it was like, yeah, you put a poster up in your, you know, 9th grade classroom saying, looking for a drummer, and you've been friends ever since. Or if you answered a casting call. Like, if you make something that's beautiful and is meaningful to people, then you have put good into the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that feels like a good place for us to pause and look back and see if I can try and synthesize a little bit of some of what we talked about the Spice Girls. So the Spice Girls, you know, hitting the scene the way they did in the mid 90s, they in some ways kind of epitomize the feminism of the mid 90s, which gave with one hand and took with the other. So we had these 5 women who in many ways had more control over their careers than many of their contemporaries. They are still, the first album is the best-selling album by a girl, all-female group ever, still.
That's amazing. I would have expected Destiny's Child to be further. Oh, wow.
So in many ways, they were, you know, had greater agency than many of their contemporary female artists. And also, they were forced into this hypersexualized version, each of them, of themselves, that was, and a schedule that was absolutely grueling, and a scrutiny that was punishing, such that more than one of them had eating disorder. They all had body issues. I didn't even tell. I read when I was reading about them, after Victoria Posh Spice had her first baby, like 8 weeks after the child was born, she was on a talk show where he weighed her to see if she was back to her pre-baby weight. Yeah, Emily's
8 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, not that that's ever okay.
I don't care if it's a freaking year. It is not acceptable to weigh a woman on an actress on a or a musician on a morning show or whatever, a talk show. It's not okay unless it's one of those Biggest Losers, and even then, I don't think we should be doing that. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Anyway, so you know the kind of so these women.
There's also the tabloid culture in Britain, in the UK, is like
this
so
is a British
ugly
show that did that.
Yeah, it's so ugly in ways that American, like, I'm not saying ours is perfect at all, but it's ugly in ways that
different ways
we just don't do.
Yeah. Agreed. Different ways. Yeah. So they were under constant scrutiny, constantly being told they weren't good enough. They weren't good musicians. They weren't good dancers. They weren't pretty enough. They weren't thin enough. They weren't. Meanwhile, one of the most wildly popular pop groups of the 20th century, period. So both in the abstract, in terms of like what they represented, and in the way that they were received by the world, they epitomized sort of the push and pull of feminism of the 90s and what it is to move through the world with a body that is marginalized by our culture. There are some seriously problematic things about their archetypes and the names that they were given by this journalist at Top of the Pops. The fact that the one Black Spice Girl was named Scary Spice. The fact that we had the youngest who was blonde and blue-eyed who was named Baby Spice. Like, these things it's almost like they were saying the quiet part out loud. Yeah. And nobody reacted. And I really wish that, or maybe they did and I was unaware of it, but I really wish there had been more in the 90s pushback to say like, this doesn't feel right to call the Black woman scary. Like, hello? Well,
and the way that Jerry pushed back on being Sexy Spice. Like,
which was in part, as I recall, again, I couldn't find any article that talked about this today, but I recall her being like, as if we aren't all sexy. So even her rejection was part of the rejection of the leader and followers that all five of them had been sort of pushing from the beginning. So some of the ways that these five women pushed back against kind of what was expected of them was that the two men who created the band wanted them all to dress alike. He wanted them to be sort of, he says he wanted them to have diversity of like heights and body styles so that their fans could see themselves in the girls. But then he wanted them to dress alike. Yeah, I know. I'm like, they were all tiny.
Yeah. I mean, I remember there was a thing made of the fact that Jerry was like relatively short, like 5'1".
I don't remember how tall.
And yeah. I remember there being and then she's very busty.
She's curvy. She's very curvy, but she was also very thin because she had an eating disorder.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But that was a diversity of body styles at the time, right? Yeah. So, and there was this push and pull, like where the girls were sort of over the top versions of themselves, but also dressed for the male gaze. But also they were things they were comfortable in, just more so. And in fact, they make that point in the movie. There's this one sort of montage. It's a photo shoot and they try on each other's clothes. And they're like being each other and they're all kind of like, this is uncomfortable. How do you wear this all the time? Oh, I don't like this. How do you wear this all the time? Of course, Jerry's in Mel C. Sporty's outfit. And she's like, actually, this is really comfortable. But the rest of them, like the implication is that Mel B is comfortable in what the bodysuits that she was wearing and that Jerry was comfortable in the and that bathing suit that she was wearing.
That speaks to why this would be so beloved by the transgender and gay community, in that, like, it's just like, there's nothing wrong with any of these. This is just what I'm comfortable wearing.
Right.
And like, I like it and I look good in it.
Yeah.
So
that montage, actually, I really loved it. They didn't just try on each other's clothes. They tried on all different kind of personas. So like there's this one scene where Sporty is dressed Sporty, and I'm not sure who the other one was. I think maybe it was Baby, but they were wearing like grease, and Sporty's dressed as like a greaser, like a man in like the rolled up jeans and like the big pompadour. She looks great, by the way. But they did a little gender bending too. Like somebody else dressed as Elvis, like in this montage, which is just the whole movie is a throwaway. And so it wasn't
that's the thing. Like, even a throwaway can be meaningful.
Yeah.
like, and they're just having fun, which is part of like, I have noticed over and over again in this project we're doing, is that so often we're just reacting to the fact that they're having fun.
I think you are exactly right. And we didn't talk about that before, but I think the synthesis is a great place to name that. I think part of their appeal, despite the fact that they were so-called manufactured, that these 5 women all replied to a casting call, is that the chemistry between them feels real, and the fun that they are having feels absolutely real. I think that the Pepsi spot that they did, that's part of what Pepsi was looking for. That's part of what makes, I don't drink soda. I don't particularly care for soda, but I was watching that spot to prepare for this. I was like, damn, that looks so fun. I love Pepsi. Those girls were having fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think you're exactly right that the just joy of friendship and of dance and of music and of what they were doing is part of what
dressing
made
up
them so wildly popular.
Yeah.
Dressing up, being themselves or being versions of themselves.
Well, and it's interesting too, because like we come from like a relatively rigid background in terms of thoughts about art, but there's also thoughts about like friendship, like, like that you should make friends in one way or another way.
Yeah.
That it's like illegitimate somehow to make friends by going to a friend meetup or whatever. So now this is partially like, I think that people have relaxed a little bit about this, but it's still like, it's so hard to make friends as an adult.
Yeah.
But this was in 97. This was back when like internet dating was like really, really looked down on.
Yeah, it was totally stigmatized. People told lies about how they met.
Yes. And so like that sort of thing, like everything has to be organic or else it's not real. And yet like there's this genuine camaraderie and chemistry and friendship among these 5 women who answered a casting call.
Yeah. 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 So the through line for me about the Spice Girls looking back is sort of the push and pull, the give and take in the ways that I think that was often positive, sort of straddling like the hypersexualized costumes that they were wearing. And yet, at least in the movie, all 5 of them were relatively asexual in the way that they showed up with other characters, and even in that moment with the nearly nude male dancers where it wasn't just Baby. Like all 5 of them were like, ugh, this is not okay. So there's this repeated through line of both and for the Spice Girls, and it's really interesting to look back on, and it shows up in multiple places, right? They were both wildly popular and panned by the critics, right? They were both trivial and like not important. And also Nelson Mandela was like, these women are my heroines. What? Right? Like they were both doing it perfectly and not very good. And also sold a bazillion copies.
Yeah.
They were both appealing to the male gaze and showing up fully as themselves. Or maybe not fully, but showing up as themselves, right? Like in ways that they directed. So there's this really interesting kind of both and with the Spice Girls phenomenon and with these 5 women in particular, that it makes sense to me now, looking back on it 25, 30 years later, that they captured our imagination the way that they did. Because we thought we knew exactly who and what they were, but they surprised us. Like the knee-jerk 20-year-old Tracie's response was, ugh, these are 2-dimensional characters just created to please men. And I was wrong. And I was right. And I think that tension is part of what is so fascinating about them. And I'm so glad too that tension opened up, and the tension and the popularity opened up space to ask these questions, to invite Adele, like, who was whatever, 8, however old she was, to, imagine being a pop star, that opened up space for women younger than I to have this gateway drug to be like, yeah, friends are more important than dudes. And I can be who I am. And if people don't like it, so I like, yeah. So anyway, I feel like it's funny to me that this is the one that I'm a little like more scattered than I usually am. So I'm having a hard time pulling together a synthesis, but that's where I'm landing. And it's really, when you ask me about like why this one, I didn't even mention, I don't know if I could find it again, but somewhere there exists a photograph of 21-year-old Tracie wearing a tight red dress with that like spray hair color, red and like blonde in the front. And I'm pushing like 2 big palm fronds away so that I'm like peeking through these like potted plants as Ginger Spice circa 1998. Like, and that photograph, that's in my brain. That's part of the furniture of my brain, is that like in an alternate universe, I could be Ginger Spice. Like there's, and like, I don't want to be Ginger regularly. Like we've talked about all the reasons that I don't want to live her life. But even the possibility is like fun. It's just fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, getting to try something on for a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's one thing we talked a little bit before we started recording that I just want to make sure we underline, because I don't know that we did say it, which is that a big part of the backlash against this is the fact that girls liked it, and it was geared towards girls. And so anything that girls and women like is trivialized.
Yeah, I think we implied it, but I don't know if we spelled it out quite so clearly. That indeed, that part of, I think, what made Roger Ebert, I mean, not that Roger Ebert like held back when he didn't like something, but I think part of what made it very socially acceptable for Roger Ebert to completely pan this movie was that its biggest fan base was girls under 13, teenagers, and young 20-somethings like I was at the time. Yeah. And it's okay to piss on stuff that they like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if it's not made with a dude in mind.
Right.
Then like clearly this is a niche. This is a niche thing, and like I didn't like it because I wasn't centered.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, this has been fun. Thank you for coming with me on this trek to the 90s.
I'm gonna be playing Wannabe after I get off.
Yeah. And listeners, if I made you want to watch Spice World, I'm really sorry. It is not streaming. I actually had to dig out my old VHS tape in order to rewatch it. I don't know if there's some sort of dispute about the music or something, but it's not streaming anywhere. You cannot find this movie streaming. So I'm sorry for that disappointing news. So, but okay. So it's your turn next, Em.
Yes.
What deep thoughts are you bringing me next week?
So next time I'm going to be sharing my deep thoughts about the Addams Family. So I'm specifically going to be talking about the 2 1990s films that had Raul Julia, so Addams Family and Addams Family Values. But I'm also going to get into the original Charles Addams comics because I really loved those. I have not seen Wednesday, the new show.
You should watch it. It is so much fun.
I know I'll love it. I know I will. This is me being commitment phobic.
No, you will love it. You need to like clear some time and just watch it. Christina Ricci shows up in
does she?
Wednesday. She's like, she's a side character. Yeah. No spoilers.
And Fred Armisen plays Fester, doesn't he? I'm pretty sure. So yeah, I have not seen that. And part of it is because I love Raul Julia and Angelica Houston so much as Gomez and Morticia.
These two, they do a good job. And it's, you know, what's the guy's name who plays, but he's actually Latino. And so,
yeah.
And there was like backlash for casting him. Like, what? But
and he looks more like the Charles
drawings.
Adams's drawings. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a mystery. You're going to love it. You're going to love it so much. You're going to love it so much.
So I have so much affection for this story. The characters created, and it kind of embodies my like whimsical with an edge.
Yeah.
Is my personal preference for everything, my style, everything. So
yeah, totally.
So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to revisiting the movies and chatting with you about it.
Cool. Well, I look forward to hearing your deep thoughts next week. And listeners, if our deep thoughts have engendered your deep thoughts, we want to hear them. Seriously. So you can share them with us by emailing us at guygirlsmedia@gmail.com. You can go to our website, guygirlsmedia.com, and go to the listener forum and let us know there. Or you can find us on socials. We are each there under our own names. Remember, Tracie has an IE. Or we actually do have a couple of accounts as Guy Girls Media on Insta and TikTok. Although, is TikTok going to stick around? I don't know.
Who knows? It might be gone by the time this episode goes live.
Yeah. Well, if TikTok still exists, there is a Guy Girls Media TikTok. We don't post very often, but we are there, and we will get your message. And we do have an Insta. So share your deep thoughts with us. And until next time.
Until next time.
Do you like stickers? Sure, we all do. If you head over to guygirlsmedia.com/sign up and share your address with us, we'll send you a sticker. It really is that easy. But don't wait, there's a limited quantity. Thanks for listening. Our theme music is Professor Umlaut by Kevin MacLeod from incompetech.com. Find full music credits in the show notes. Until next time, remember, pop culture is still culture. And shouldn't you know what's in your head?